I had always been drawn to the abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. Rumors swirled that it was cursed, that anyone who dared to enter would never escape. I didn't believe it. As an urban explorer, I'd spent years searching for the perfect thrill, and this place seemed like the ultimate challenge. I'd heard the entrance was hidden behind a tangle of overgrown bushes, that only those with a keen eye could find it. But I wasn't one to shy away from a fight. I set off early on a Saturday morning, eager to beat the crowds and make the asylum mine. As I made my way through the dense foliage, the air grew thick with an eerie silence. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches tangling together like skeletal fingers. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I pressed on, my heart pounding with excitement. Finally, I stumbled upon the entrance, a weathered wooden door, partially hidden by vines and moss. It looked ancient, as if it hadn't been opened in decades. I pushed the door creakily open, and a musty smell wafted out. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The air was heavy with dust, and cobwebs clung to every surface. I coughed, covering my mouth with my shirt. The silence was oppressive, like someone was waiting for me to make a wrong move. I fumbled in my backpack for my flashlight and turned it on, casting flickering shadows across the walls. I took a deep breath, feeling a thrill of trepidation. This was it. I was finally inside the asylum. But as I looked around, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I took a step forward, my foot creaking on the worn linoleum floor. The beam from my flashlight danced across the walls, illuminating peeling paint and rusted medical equipment. I felt like an intruder in someone else's home, like I was trespassing on a private memory. But I couldn't help myself. I had to know what had happened here. I wandered down a long corridor, my footsteps echoing off the walls. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. I could feel the weight of history bearing down on me, like the asylum was holding its breath in anticipation of something or someone. As I turned a corner, I caught a glimpse of something that made my heart skip a beat. A door, hidden behind a tattered curtain, seemed to be slightly ajar. I felt an inexplicable pull towards it, as if something inside was calling to me. I pushed the door open slowly, and a faint whisper seemed to caress my ear. "Don't go in." But I didn't listen. The room beyond was small and Spartan, with a single metal hospital bed at its center. On the bedside table, a small, leather-bound book lay open, as if someone had been reading it just moments before. The pages were filled with scribbled notes and cryptic symbols, but one entry caught my eye. Patient 314, violent episodes. Medication failure, desperate measures. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that patient 314 was likely the same person who'd written those words, or at least had been. The question was, what had happened to them? I turned the page, and a faint whisper seemed to echo through the room once more. "Get out while you still can." This time I listened. As I stepped back from the bedside table, the whisper seemed to fade into the background, but my skin crawled with unease. I knew I had to keep moving to see where these corridors would lead me. The air seemed to thicken, like a fog was rolling in off the walls. I took a deep breath and continued down the corridor, my footsteps echoing through the silence. The walls began to seem to shift and writhe around me, like they were alive. I caught glimpses of doorways that didn't exist when I first entered the asylum, and corridors that seemed to loop back on themselves. It was as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling before my eyes. I stumbled upon a sign that read Ward 13. Below it, a small note scrawled in red ink: "Do not enter." but I felt an overwhelming sense of curiosity, like I had to know what secrets lay hidden behind those doors. I pushed on, the whisper growing louder in my ear. "You shouldn't be here." As I turned the corner into Ward 13, a chill ran down my spine. The walls were covered in peeling paint and cracked plaster, and the air was thick with the stench of rotting flesh. I could feel eyes watching me, boring into my skin like cold, dead weights. I began to explore the ward, searching for any clues or signs of what had happened here. But every door I opened led only to more corridors, more rooms, and more questions. It was as if the asylum was trying to confuse me, to lead me deeper into its depths before revealing its darkest secrets. And then I saw it, a series of photographs tacked to the wall, showing patients who had once been here but were now long gone. Patient 314 was among them, their eyes black as coal, their skin pale and decaying. I felt a jolt of recognition. This was the same patient I'd seen in the room with the leather-bound book. But it wasn't just patient 314 who caught my eye. There were others, all of whom seemed to be staring straight at me, their eyes burning with a malevolent intensity. I knew then that I had stumbled into something much bigger than myself, something that threatened to consume me whole. As I stood there, frozen in terror, the whispers grew louder. They were soft at first, just a gentle hum in the background of my mind. But then they began to take on words, phrases that seemed to come from all directions at once. "Get out while you still can." "You shouldn't be here." "We've been waiting for you." The voices were like 1,000 tiny pinpricks, each one digging into my skin and making me shiver. I tried to cover my ears, but it was too late. The whispers had already seeped inside my mind, taking root like a disease. I took a step back, but my feet felt heavy as if they were rooted to the spot. The voices grew louder still until I could make out individual words, phrases that seemed to be spoken directly into my ear. "You're not alone. We've been watching you. It's time to join us." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized that I wasn't alone in the asylum. Whatever was making those whispers was right behind me, waiting for me to make my next move. I took a deep breath and tried to focus, but it was no use. The whispers had taken over my mind, driving me towards some unknown destination. I stumbled forward, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. Just the whispers, echoing off the walls like a chorus of restless spirits. As I made my way through the winding corridors, the whispers grew fainter until they were almost inaudible. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but it was short-lived. The silence that followed was oppressive, weighing heavily on my shoulders like a physical presence. I knew I had to keep moving to see what lay ahead. The first ward was supposed to be the oldest part of the asylum, built in the late 19th century. It was said to be where the most troubled patients were kept, those who refused treatment or presented a danger to themselves or others. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I approached the first ward's entrance. The doors were old and rusted, with heavy iron hinges that creaked ominously as I pushed them open. The room beyond was dimly lit, the only sound the soft hum of a solitary light bulb suspended from the ceiling. It cast eerie shadows on the walls, making it seem like the very fabric of reality was twisted and distorted. I stepped forward, my footsteps echoing off the walls. The air was thick with dust, and I could see cobwebs clinging to the corners of the room. It was as if time had stood still here, frozen in a moment that never came. I began to explore, my eyes scanning the rows of abandoned beds and medical equipment. There were no signs of recent occupation, just the remnants of a long-forgotten era. I felt like an intruder trespassing on someone else's private hell, but I couldn't help myself. I had to know what happened here, why these patients were left behind. As I delved deeper into the ward, I began to uncover clues that hinted at a darker history than I could have ever imagined. Patients who had been subjected to inhumane experiments, pushed to their limits and beyond. Others who had simply vanished, leaving behind only whispers of their existence. It was as if the asylum had swallowed them whole, erasing them from the face of the earth. And then I saw it, a single bed, still occupied by an unseen presence. The sheets were pulled up to the shoulders, revealing a pale face with sunken eyes that seemed to bore into my very soul. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I was not alone in this place. Whatever was here, it was watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. As I stood there, frozen in terror, the face in the bed seemed to stare into my very soul. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as if I was about to retch. The eyes, sunken and black as coal, seemed to bore into my skin, making me shiver. I tried to step back, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The face didn't move or react. It just kept staring at me, its gaze like a cold wind that cut through my very being. I tried to speak, but my voice was caught in my throat. I felt like I was paralyzed, unable to move or speak. The face in the bed seemed to be drawing me in, pulling me towards it with an unseen force. I felt like I was drowning in its gaze, suffocating under its weight. And then suddenly the face jerked forward, its eyes snapping into focus. It was a woman, her skin deathly pale, her hair wild and unkempt. She stared at me with a look of pure hatred, her eyes blazing with fury. I felt like I had been punched in the gut, my breath knocked out of me. I stumbled backwards, tripping over my own feet as I tried to get away from the woman. But she didn't move, she just kept staring at me, her gaze like a cold wind that cut through my very being. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing with fear. I knew I had to get out of there to escape the asylum and its deadly secrets. But as I turned to run, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A doorway hidden behind a tattered curtain creaked open by itself, and beyond it I saw a corridor lined with doors that seemed to lead deeper into the heart of the asylum. I knew then that I was trapped. The woman's gaze had unlocked a door in me, and now I was forced to face whatever horrors lay within. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. And then I stepped forward into the darkness beyond the doorway. As I stepped into the corridor, the air grew thick with an eerie silence. The walls seemed to press in on me from all sides, making my skin crawl with unease. I could feel eyes upon me, boring into my skin like cold, dead weights. Every step I took echoed off the walls, making it seem like I was being followed by unseen footsteps. The corridor stretched out before me, a seemingly endless expanse of darkness and shadow. I fumbled for my flashlight, its weak beam casting flickering shadows on the walls. The light seemed to dance across the surface of the walls, making me feel like I was trapped in a waking nightmare. And then I heard it, a whisper, soft and raspy, that seemed to come from all directions at once. "Get out while you still can," it whispered. "Leave now and never look back." The voice was like nothing I'd ever heard before, a cold, mirthless thing that sent shivers down my spine. But I knew I couldn't leave. I had to see what lay beyond the next doorway, no matter how terrifying it might be. I took another step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The whisper seemed to grow louder, more urgent, but I couldn't make out any words. It was like a mantra, a litany of doom that echoed through my mind. And then I saw it, a door ahead, slightly ajar, beckoning me towards some unknown fate. I felt a sense of inevitability wash over me, as if I'd been drawn to this moment all along. I pushed the door open and stepped across the threshold. The whisper stopped, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. But I knew I wasn't alone. Something was waiting for me on the other side, something that would make my blood run cold. As I stepped into the room, I was struck by its eerie beauty. The walls were adorned with old, ornate mirrors, their surfaces reflecting the dim light like 1,000 tiny eyes. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I approached one of the mirrors, its surface rippling like water. I peered into its depths, and for a moment I thought I saw something there, a shadowy figure lurking just beyond the edge of perception. I blinked, and it was gone. But when I looked again, I could have sworn I saw it reappear. This time it was closer, its presence making the air feel thick with tension. I took a step back, my heart racing with fear. But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of myself in another mirror. And that's when I saw it, a shadowy figure standing just behind me, its eyes glowing like embers in the dark. I spun around, but there was no one there. The room seemed to spin around me, and I stumbled backwards, my vision blurring. When my sight cleared, I saw myself standing alone in the room, surrounded by mirrors that reflected 1,000 different versions of myself. But it was not just my own reflections that stared back at me. I saw others, faces twisted with pain and despair. And then I saw the figure again, its eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity. I tried to run, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. The figure began to move closer, its presence filling the room with a dark, malevolent energy. I felt myself being pulled towards it, drawn into a world of madness and despair. And then everything went black. As I regained consciousness, I found myself disoriented and alone in a long, winding corridor. The walls were lined with old portraits, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow me as I stumbled through the darkness. I tried to remember how I'd gotten there, but my mind was a complete blank. Panic set in as I realized I had no idea where I was or how to escape. Every step I took echoed off the walls, making it seem like I was being herded towards some unknown fate. I stumbled forward, desperate to find a way out of this maze-like asylum. But every door I tried led only to more corridors, more rooms filled with strange and foreboding artifacts. It was as if I'd entered a living nightmare from which there was no awakening. The air was thick with the scent of decay and rot, and I could feel the weight of history bearing down upon me. I began to wonder if I'd ever find my way out, or if I'd be trapped forever in this labyrinthine hellhole. And then I heard it, the sound of footsteps, echoing through the corridors like a death knell. They were getting closer, and I knew I had to move fast if I wanted to survive. I took off in a sprint, my heart pounding in my chest as I careened from one doorway into another. But no matter how fast I ran, the footsteps kept pace with me, always just out of reach. It was as if I was being stalked by some unseen predator, one that would stop at nothing to claim its prey. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw a glimmer of light in the distance, a door that led out into the bright sunlight and freedom. As I reached the door, I could feel my legs trembling beneath me. I was so close to freedom, but a part of me wondered if it was all just a cruel joke. I turned the handle and pushed the door open, revealing a bright and airy courtyard. The warm sunlight felt like a benediction on my skin as I stepped out into its radiance. But my relief was short-lived. A voice behind me spoke up, sending a shiver down my spine. "You'll never leave this place," it said. I spun around, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to come from all around me, echoing off the walls. And then I saw her. A figure in a white coat, standing just beyond the courtyard's edge. Her eyes were cold and hard, and they seemed to bore into my very soul. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Help me." I felt a surge of anger and fear. Who was this woman, and why did she want me to stay? "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You don't remember, do you?" she said, her eyes filling with tears. Remember what? I repeated, feeling a sense of desperation creeping in. Everything, she said. Your past, your present, everything. How can I help you? I asked, feeling like I was trapped in some kind of twisted game. You have to tell me the truth, she said, her voice cracking with emotion. What truth? I asked, feeling a sense of trepidation building inside me. The truth about what really happened in room 314, she said, her eyes locked on mine. You have to tell me what you did. As I stood there, frozen in fear, the woman's words seemed to echo through my mind. Room 314. What had I done? What secrets lay hidden within those walls? The woman took a step closer, her eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity. Come with me, she said, her voice low and husky. I'll show you the truth. Without hesitation, I followed her through the winding corridors of the asylum. We passed by doors adorned with strange symbols and flickering fluorescent lights that seemed to hum with an eerie energy. The air was thick with the scent of decay and rot, and I could feel the weight of history bearing down upon me. Finally, we arrived at a door marked Room 314. It was old and worn, the wood cracked and faded. The woman produced a key and unlocked the door, pushing it open with a creaking screech. Inside, I found myself in a narrow room filled with old medical equipment and dusty files. In the center of the room, on a rusty hospital bed, lay a figure bound by chains. It was me, or rather, it was my reflection. The woman stepped forward, her eyes blazing with an unholy light. "This is you," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "This is what you've been trying to escape." I stared in horror as the figure on the bed began to stir. Its eyes snapped open, and it fixed me with a gaze that was both familiar and yet completely alien. "I'm you," it whispered, its voice barely audible over the sound of my own ragged breathing. "Or at least, I'm what's left of you." The figure's body began to shift and contort, its limbs stretching and twisting in ways that defied human anatomy. Its skin turned a sickly shade of green, and its eyes burned with an otherworldly energy. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling in terror as the figure rose from the bed. It loomed over me, its presence suffocating. "You see," it hissed, its voice like a snake slithering through the grass, "you've been trying to escape the darkness within yourself, but you can't run forever." The woman's eyes seemed to gleam with malevolence as she watched the scene unfold. "It's time for you to face your demons," she said, her voice dripping with sadistic glee. And with that, the figure reached out and touched my face. I felt a surge of energy course through my veins, and suddenly I was flooded with memories and emotions I had long suppressed. The truth about what really happened in room 314 began to reveal itself to me, like a dark and twisted tapestry unraveling before my eyes. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling in terror as the figure loomed over me. The woman's eyes seemed to gleam with malevolence as she watched the scene unfold. "It's time for you to face your demons," she said, her voice dripping with sadistic glee. And with that, the figure reached out and touched my face. I felt a surge of energy course through my veins, and suddenly I was flooded with memories and emotions I had long suppressed. The truth about what really happened in room 314 began to reveal itself to me, like a dark and twisted tapestry unraveling before my eyes. But as I stood there, frozen in fear, the figure's touch began to take its toll. My vision started to blur, my thoughts grew cloudy, and my body began to feel heavy, weighed down by some unseen force. The woman's smile seemed to grow wider, her eyes sparkling with an otherworldly light. "You're not ready to face the truth," she said, her voice like a cold breeze on a winter's night. And with that, the room began to spin around me. I stumbled, falling to my knees as the floor seemed to tilt beneath me. The figure loomed over me, its presence suffocating. "You have to let go of your memories," it whispered, its voice like a gentle breeze on a summer's day. "You have to forget." But how could I forget? How could I erase the memories that had haunted me for so long? The woman stepped forward, her eyes blazing with an unholy light. "I'll show you the way," she said, her voice dripping with malice. And with that, she reached out and took my hand. Together, we stumbled through the winding corridors of the asylum, the silence between us oppressive, heavy with secrets and lies. We walked for what felt like hours, the darkness closing in around us like a shroud. Finally, we arrived at a door marked the ward. It was old and worn, the wood cracked and faded. The woman produced a key and unlocked the door, pushing it open with a creaking screech. Inside, I found myself in a long, narrow ward filled with rows of beds. Each bed was occupied by a patient, their faces blank and expressionless. They seemed to be staring at me, their eyes empty and hollow. The woman led me to the far end of the ward, where one patient lay alone on a bed. It was a young girl, no more than 10 years old. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes sunken with exhaustion. "This is you," the woman said, her voice dripping with malice. "This is what's left of you." The girl looked up at me, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. "I've been waiting for you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of my own ragged breathing. And with that, everything went black.